introduce Rajeev ji, and the session that we're having is going to be in an interactive format because we haven't had time to ask a lot of questions from our experts. I think this is kind of a diversion from that, and the session without presentation. And here the session is about GIZ project on water security and climate adaptation rural India. In fact, we can go beyond the project and ask a lot of other questions because not only Mr. Rajeev Ahal is working as on this project as the in charge or team leader of the project, but he is in GIZ India is the director of natural resource management and agroecology. Is very fascinating, and in the environment and natural resource cluster. And he has been leading this bilateral project because it's India and Germany. It's called bilateral. And it's the project and plus another global project he's handling on sustainable soil management, along with rural development and social protection and sustainable farming, market-led developments. I think another what I liked about the profile, and let me also share that artificial intelligence, development, green financing, farmer producer organizations is what something he has been range of issues, because what we have seen is Namami Gange and with the National Institute of Urban Affairs, we're talking about a different aspect, and he has a different set of approaches. And I think what the fellowship is all about to learn different approaches that are time tested altogether. So Rajeev is here with years of experience working on this, a lot of international organizations in India and Africa. And I think the most important part I liked with the profile Rajeev is he has electrical engineering background and plus another course that he has been a lot of things that he has done. But one part is that he loves to write on fiction and non-fiction work. So he has published. In fact, today morning we had a very little exercise where we were asking what is the kind of favorite book each fellow has, and they had posted it. So we collected a kind of a 20 list of 20 interesting books altogether. So over to you. We are looking forward to this session, Rajeev ji. In fact, what we have done is your material is already shared yesterday with everybody, and in the yesterday's group exercise, they all had gone through it and prepared set of questions. But I leave to the fellows to ask those questions themselves. If they're not, then I'll put them in the chat for you. Yeah, over to you, Rajeev.
Thank you, Alka-ji. Thank you. And really a pleasure to be here. And especially because I consider myself as a practitioner. As you've seen, I'm a failed electrical engineer who's been dabbling in everything else except electrical engineering, right? And I have no formal degrees for any of the work that I've done in my life. So I think the real test for me has been learning on the job. And therefore, I'm a fellow like you even today. So when we had this interesting option to bring on a project on artificial intelligence, I said, wow, this is something I would love to learn and do something about. So yeah, with you on the learning front, totally and very happy to be here. I think maybe I'll just take about 5-7 minutes to share a bit more about the GIZ and the sort of space for you to also understand how this space operates. So I'll unpack some of the words that we've been using. So if you look at India as we head into our 75th year of being independent, it's interesting that Germany as a country has been a partner for almost 64 years in this journey so far. So from a very early stage, German government got involved in a sort of a bilateral cooperation, which is government to government. So it's not so mostly, working through the governments on both sides. Now, when German government does its bilateral cooperation, it uses multiple instruments. One is the whole instrument of technical cooperation, where the belief is that just giving money is not going to solve problem. But actually, if you can also bring technical experts together to unpack, find solutions to problems, work to show new models, then that money and the money from the host government can be put to better use. So GIZ, German International Cooperation, where me and my colleagues are working, which is based in Delhi as a head office. And right now, GIZ is working in almost like 115 countries worldwide. right? And here, what we mostly do is that almost every year there's an intergovernmental discussion where priorities gets established, and then we identify projects where then we work with the concerned ministries and state governments. But what is the idea? I mean, in GIZ or the projects that we do on behalf of German government and Indian government are classically projects already with a death wish and a death date, right? So we know that on this date, 3 years from now, we are going to come to a close. Therefore, what's the purpose of this? The purpose is then to work with a certain sector and a ministry and a state government and look at the key problems, bottlenecks, look at working not in isolation to create the beautiful oasis of solutions, but to work with the system all the time to create the solutions and evidences on the ground, pilot them. In this, we work very closely with a lot of localized civil society organizations, grounded non-government organizations, research organizations. So MS Swaminathan, Terry, all the names that you hear of or know of, we work very closely to bring their expertise also together. So we all try to take a problem and find a solution for it. And the idea then is to use the technical cooperation money to find solutions, but not to implement them. The idea is that the implementation, especially for a country like India, where there are fairly high amount of resources, should come from public finances or should come from private sector. So idea is to create sustainable approaches right from day one. And I'll try to share with you quickly on the VASCA side if you've read. Now, what has been the journey I wanted to share also in terms of a technical cooperation approach? So when 60s the work started, or 50s, the key problem for India was food security, starvation. So a lot of the work in the initial years was around working on agriculture, animal husbandry. In fact, I'm from Himachal, and my earliest recollection of when I was very young was of Indo-German yellow trucks. These were Caterpillar trucks. They were not known in India. So these trucks were introduced through the cooperation of how agriculture could be improved and much of machinery. Then it grew. As agriculture grew, then it came to a point where the understanding was that you cannot just work on the farmers' fields. You have to work on the areas around the farmers' fields, which are the watersheds. So then the work around watersheds happened, which then became a national level program as well. The initial trials that we did in Aurangabad, Ahmednagar, and these parts of Maharashtra became some good examples, got mainstreamed into government programs, World Bank programs, NABARD. And then as the evolution of our experience and journey grew, we realized that just working on a small watershed is not enough. You have to work on the entire ecosystem, the sub-basin. You have to look at water demand supply. You have to look at not just water, but you have to look at the interaction between water, soil, vegetation, which includes agroforestry, forest, agriculture. So start looking at all these dimensions together. And then of late, the understanding is that if we are going to look at, in a country where we've now achieved grain surplus and a grain security, it's time to start looking at the quality of food we eat. Is it going to be always this intensive agriculture, chemically driven, industrially grown food, which brings high cost to farmers, leaves very little money with them, creates market dependencies and vulnerabilities, and in the end, the food we get on the table may be nutritious, but may also be cancer causing. So how do you take the whole safe and healthy food? But you can't just look at food in the last part on a plate. Then you have to work on the farm. How is such food grown? And for food to grow well on the farm, you have to understand that the water, the air, everything that will come to the farm will come from the ecosystem around. So you have to then link the watershed to the farm, to the plate, and to the processing and all. So this whole concept of linking all of these things together, nature, what I call nature, farm, and folk, is agroecology. So it's a framework which ties different silo things that we do together. So just to one maybe couple of minutes on VASCA, you've read it. Idea here was to look at water security, and water, as we find in many parts of India, is a topic divided between anything between 17 to 34 departments. So somebody is looking at wastewater, somebody is looking at rural water supply, somebody is looking at water conservation, somebody's looking at soil conservation, and they're all working in silos or trying to find ways to work together. So here, the idea of this project, which is brings two ministries together, Ministry of Rural Development with a large chunk of money for rural development, of which almost, if you look at Mahatma Gandhi Narega, which is almost to the tune of 1 lakh crores this year, sorry, 100,000 crores. The 65% of that money can be spent on natural resource management and water. And then there's Ministry of Jal Shakti, which is the mandated ministry on water. How does it bring its policy and its design and sustainability into this? And then the idea is not to talk, but to walk the talk. So we work in 5 of the most affected, biggest districts, states of India. So these are Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, and Karnataka. This is almost like 40% of India's geographical area and 40% of India's population. So if we are able to find solutions here and test them and see how they can work and prove and show to others, then the state governments could take this up on their own and do it. And I'm very happy that in the year, we're into 1.5 years, almost 2 years of our cycle. And good part is that the practices created in most states have now been picked up by state governments, and the various district level bodies, the state level bodies are taking these planning approaches and rolling them out to their entire states. And actually, the Ministry of Rural Development is rolling this out. The GIS based planning, the digital processes that we sort of innovated and piloted are now being rolled out to the whole country. So with that, I will stop my monologue. And the idea was to give you a backdrop, and I'm very much looking forward to questions and a discussion with you. Over to you guys. So who wants to break the ice, guys? Who's the brave one?
Yeah, Chaitanya, yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. So my question was regarding the, am I audible? Yeah. So my question was regarding the nitrate pollution. Like nitrate, the active nitrogen is used in industries a lot and in the fields as a fertilizers. And we as a developing country, cannot live without that. So how do we deal with the nitrate pollution that's affecting our water bodies and everything?
That's a very good question. See, the issue with pollution is that it's not that its problems are not known or the solutions are not known. The technologies are there. We know everything. The problem is the uptake of non-nitrate solutions is not being done at a big level. For example, well, some people would blame the subsidy orientation of how we do fertilizers in this country to say that the farmers therefore use nitrate rich fertilizers. But the question is, do they use the right amount? Nobody, it's like if I give you a paracetamol and I tell you you have to take it twice a day, but if you end up taking 10 times a day, is paracetamol responsible or is me responsible in terms of how I use it? So I think that's one problem. This whole idea of what is good, how much is good, how to use it judiciously. Somehow this is not well understood. The feeling typically in India is Jada ghee dalo, put more ghee, put more sugar, and you'll be healthier. So the same logic we put for soil, we overdo it. So are we looking at judicious use? Second thing is, are we looking at alternatives? Now, what are the natural alternatives? Obviously, it is around regenerative agriculture. It's about natural farming. It's about a higher, more niche version of natural farming called organic farming, right? Now, question is, are these being popularized? Are these popular enough? Are they giving the farmers money enough that then farmers start using this and therefore use less nitrate rich options, especially the totally synthetic chemical ones? Now, you'll be very happy to know that actually it's, before 60s, before the fertilizer and naphtha came to India, for whatever it was good, we were into natural farming, isn't it? We were all natural farmers. But then this came and it went to an overdose. Maybe it was also needed. In 60s, we were in a huge, very serious problem with grain security. And therefore, green revolution was justified and was needed. But like I said, there's time now to look at some of these issues. Now, you'll be very happy to know there is work going on. So if you look at, for example, in Andhra Pradesh, there is a strong natural farming program, which is actually sponsored by the government in Andhra. And there is a para NGO created by the government, led by a very intelligent, very knowledgeable ex-bureaucrat, Mr. T. Vijay Kumar. They're right now working with 200,000 farmers on the ground. And mind you, this is without subsidies. This is totally sharing, getting them convinced with evidence on how to do natural farming. And therefore, as farmers start, using these opportunities and options, the nitrate pollution will come down. Of course, that leaves out still the industrial part of it. It is, I think that is where we really struggle. The water quality issues in India are still not that strong. So how do we know? I mean, for people living in Delhi, you don't need any tests to see the quality and color of Yamuna. Or for many of you in the cities and towns where you are, the rivers that are there. I mean, Mithi River in Bombay is called Mithi, but it stinks. I mean, so, these are very obvious things, but we are not able to challenge them. So I think the citizens' response, the actually there is laws, there are policies in place. Somehow we need to help implement them. I hope that I answered you, Chaitanya.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Kripa?
Uh, am I audible, sir? Hello, sir. So my question was to you that GIZ is working in 5 states right now, and those are states which are not using irrigation as many states in India. Like Gujarat is using very great, good irrigation. Punjab and Haryana is very ahead in terms in compared to those 5 states. So are you working in this direction also in efficient irrigation systems like sprinkler and drip? Rajasthan and Maharashtra are facing severe water problems regarding this. So are you working on this in this program?
No, thanks for that question. So actually, the story of rural India and the water in rural India is very stark. In last 10 years, the groundwater in India has gone down by 100 meters all around. Almost
Yes.
65% of the groundwater has been used up in just 10 years. Surface water, we know. As soon as the monsoons have filled up the structures, within no time, it's a fight with evaporation. Before it evaporates, can we use it, right? So surface storage is also a challenge. Now, the problem is that, can you just give me a second? Sorry, some noise in the background. So what is happening is that almost 60% of the water in rural areas is totally applied to agriculture. So that's the main use. If not 16, there's some places it's even 70%. So either it's in the form of wells. So what you mentioned was canals, right? Because they become apparent. But actually, if you start looking at water use across most of the irrigated patches of all these states, almost 60% to 70% of the water that is locally available is used for agriculture. And the efficiency of this is not more than 40 to 30 to 40%. So there's a lot of losses. So what we are trying to do is that we are looking at a principle of four waters. We are saying that you just can't look at irrigation. You have to look at first on the soil moisture, because if your soil is of the right quality, it itself absorbs water from the air and it itself holds moisture for a longer time. Then you don't need to irrigate it that much. So this whole concept of taking a canal and just flooding areas with endless amount of water may not be needed. So one is soil moisture. Second is surface water. How well have we stored the water? Are we making sure that through good watershed interventions at every pocket, you are able to stop the water locally and use it locally, and then command area development. So can those surface structures be used for better water distribution, less lossy, use technologies like you mentioned about drip and sprinkler, though these come at a cost. There's a cost for both investment for putting them in place and also for running them. So some level of farmers, especially larger farmers, mid-level farmers, especially the ones who are into cash crops, can do it. But rain-fed farmers obviously will not be, and these are a huge number of farmers. The third type of water we look at is what is called the unconfined aquifers. So if you remember your geology, or if you understand it, you have soil, then you have layers of rock which are permeable, and there is some layer which is impermeable. So all the water that goes down more or less stays above the impermeable layer, right? So this is called a shallow aquifer or an unconfined aquifer, and a lot of our wells, bore wells, all go into that. Now below that rock, impermeable rock, is what is called a confined aquifer, which is an aquifer built over last 10,000 years, where seepage has happened across intercontinental spaces. There are schisms through which. So actually, you have to look at surface, and so all these four waters, and then plan for an area. So we try to look at it even a bit more comprehensive than just looking at the one element of. But you're right; these are very important at the last point. Yeah. I hope I answered you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. Yes.
Dan, you can go now. You can just ask the question.
Audible?
I can hear you. Please go ahead.
So then we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon, sir. So the question which I was, while I was listening to you, I was reading all about Germany and India. So one which strike my mind was like Germany, when compared on the numbers, have a lot of difference, like whether it may be a level of trade. So when we talk about the agriculture and the different forms of methods being adopted, to store water in these rural areas. So I just wanted to know that what are the challenges that your organization face, when it is in these rural areas in India? Because there is a lot of difference when we go out in the rural areas. There is a difference of mindset, there is a difference of literacy, I would rather say that. So I just wanted to know, everybody's talking about processes and methods, but I definitely wanted to know that the challenges you're coming across. This is what my question is. Thank you.
Rajeev, you got this? Networking.
Yeah. Alkaji, if you can help me with the question. I think his question basically was that what are the challenges, biggest challenges around water, right? Okay. No, thanks. Yeah. Sandan. So, no, I think you mentioned quite a few of them yourself, and but I think the biggest issue is that water is a contested resource. So everybody, when you have a contested resource, it's like knowing that there are only 10 Ramsidar injections in the pharmacy. Now, everybody's tendency is to run there and buy it and stock it, even if they don't need it, right? So same is happening with water. Whether you need it or you don't need it, everybody wants to take more than their fair share of water. And this applies to different uses of water, all the way from agriculture to drinking to industry or even leaving water there for itself. I mean, it's amazing to find that so much of damming of rivers and so much of intensive watershed work has been done that almost all the water has been diverted away from rivers, so much so that there's now been a national legislation. So these are called e-flows, right? Environmental flows, that at least you must leave 10% of the water in the main sources of water where it was naturally found. 10% is a very small amount. It's not enough for an ecological recharge, but that's what we've thought nationally is the right amount. And by the way, the one is now passing legislations to even ensure 10% of water is retained. So it's a heavily contested resource. So I think the question is, can we really find out with some level of science what are the competing water uses in a certain area? And we call this a water balance study or a water budgeting. So what we do is we look at how much rainwater comes in, how much water flows into a certain sub-basin, how much groundwater is available, how much is the evaporation losses, how much is the population, how much are the cattle, and approximately what is the net surplus or deficit that is available. So by that sort of an understanding, we try to come to some sort of a number, which is never perfect, but is indicative of what we need to do. So for example, it will tell us in some areas that here, for example, I'll give you an example. We were working with a CSR partner. We were just advising. We don't get into CSR in Rajasthan. And they wanted to totally work on issues of afforestation in that area. And then so we asked them, why do you want to? He said, "नहीं, वो पेड़ लगाएंगे when we plant big trees in the Rajasthan deserts, then they will bring water down and water will be available for people." Now they're not understanding an arid area with 45 to 52 degrees temperature, high transpiration, high evaporation, that actually that tree, whatever amount of water you give it, actually will end up sucking water from the ground in the end. So we told them the problem when we did a water budget analysis, we said, no, that's not the problem. The problem is this is an area of pastoralists. And most of the people here, because of an arid area, over centuries learned. And there's some very interesting movies which I would like you to see. I'll try to find them and paste them here or share that with Alkaji. Really mind-boggling that how our works have evolved has been around using water and resources. So grazing and pastoralism is one response to less water and less vegetation. And so we told them that actually what you need to do is you need to work on surface water for cattle only. So, when you start doing this analysis, it's easier to find really the problems and then work on them and solve them one at a time. Yeah. So does that help you, Sadan?
Is it okay? Sadan, is it okay? Okay, great.
Yes, ma'am. I guess I had network issues, so my question was itself a bit unclear. So I'm sorry for the.
Sadan, you paste it in the chat box. We'll see that. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, sir.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you, sir, for an insightful section. My question is, most of the rural areas depend upon agriculture as an income. So since we are talking about climate adaptation, we are focusing on climate smart agriculture as well. So my question is, for climate smart agriculture, should we focus more on the crops which require less water, or should we focus on improving the water table of that particular area, or in a combination of both?
No, I think you gave the answer. We have to do all of this, no? Because we've used too much, so we need to put it back, right? We have overdrawn on our bank account. So even, if you start looking at now the borewells going down into, the confined aquifers, which are these 5,000, 10,000-year-old aquifers, we're actually even depleting them. So can you imagine it'll take another 5,000 years to even start filling those up? So I think we need to do all of these. But when you talk about climate smart agriculture, so what does it mean? So this is a term. So all of you are well read and are quite aware that we use generally two types of slightly confusing terminologies, which is actually mean sometimes the same. So one is adaptation. That how do you do adaptation to the changing climate, right? So that if the rainfall pattern, temperature patterns are changing, how do you adapt your agriculture in a way where it is then able to work? Now, the adaptation is not just to climate, it's also to water, nah? Because, just like and then there's a mitigation. What do you do to make sure that the future impacts of climate will not happen to you? So you're sort of ensuring yourself, so you don't. So if you start using or you reduce using high water guzzling crops, it's a mitigation strategy, right? You're making sure that in the future, as the water goes down, or you also start using multi-tiered crops instead of monocultures, which respond better to temperature changes. So the microclimate created in a multi-tiered, so we have this usual picture of agriculture where there's just rolling fields and beautiful, yeah. Well, that's the wrong idea of agriculture. Any monoculture is bad. Whereas, so if you look at natural farming, if you look at what is called zero budget natural farming, many of these new forms you'll find very interesting. They talk about multiple tiers. So you do some growth or some product on agriculture from the crop. Then you have shrubs, which could be fruits. Then you have tall trees, which could be horticulture as well as agroforestry trees, which can also give income to the farmer. So the income is not just limited to crop or grain. So you've also diversified the income sources. See, any farmer living on a piece of land is not like you and me with living in a house. That land can produce so many different things. and it can only produce something at a certain point. So a certain crop like maize usually will only grow during the Kharif season. A crop like wheat will be best grown in many parts of India only in the Rabi season, the winter season. Now, what does the farmer do the rest of the year? So if there are only two crops possible or rain-fed area with just single crop possible, can we increase that farmer's income through having shrub-based income, which can happen, say, even in February, March? So there's a seasonality, rotation. There is some money coming in throughout the year. Every 5 years, he or she can then have those trees which are planted for, say, paper, can be judiciously cut and replanted, and then some level of big income comes from that. But actually, the whole framing of agriculture in rural India is actually farming. And farming goes beyond agriculture. It means agriculture, it means a bit of sheep, it means that cow, it means some piggery, it also means some poultry, it also means maybe if you are in West Bengal, Odisha, coastal parts of Tamil Nadu, Andhra, it can also mean a farm pond with fish in it, right? So that is how, when you have an integrated farming system, you're actually more climate smart, because then your risks and vulnerabilities to climate are divided over so many different options. And so we actually, as part of one of our projects called UPNRM, Umbrella Program on Natural Resource Management, we created business models, bankable business models of how a farmer could actually have such a pond. Then from that pond, there is fishery, and the borders of that pond, because there's moisture now on the bunds, is doing vegetables. Then there are trees in the back, and then the farmer is doing a combination of poultry, piggery, and fishery. And a lot of the stuff that is coming from poultry and piggery can actually be used in the pond for fertilizer. So it's actually self-contained cycles as well. And these start becoming more climate smart, right? The other aspect, of course, is this question that is always put to agriculture, especially agriculture in India by Western countries, that your greenhouse gas emissions are very high, right? That because of the way you do your agriculture, there's a lot of methane. The flooded rice creates too much emissions. So actually, there's a counterpoint to it as well. So if you do this mixed sort of a cultivation, which is also having trees which are sequestering carbon, so actually you're increasing ways of bringing carbon back from the soil into from the air into the soil. So if you do this sort of an integrated farming, it starts becoming more and more climate friendly, climate resilient, and also better for the farmer. Yeah, both in income sense as well as vulnerabilities. Alina, did I leave out anything?
No, sir. Thank you so much. You answered it very well.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Apurva?
Hello, sir. Sir, my question to you is that, sir, nowadays we see that very much urbanization is taking place. So we are facing a flash flooding problems. So, sir, it is occurring certainly due to because of runoff issue. So, sir, ultimately because of this runoff, it is leading that runoff to the rivers. So ultimately, it is polluting the river. So what are the measures that need to be undertaken to prevent it from so that the river should not get contaminated?
Okay, so you're looking at both cause and effect, right? So in the question that you are probing here. Now, if you look at an urban pocket, what is sadly happening is many of the towns, especially after. So if you really see most of India's civilizational routes are along water, na? So Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, every town is always, old ancient towns are always close to a strong permanent water source. So that way, water was very intrinsic to how urban areas developed. But what has happened is, as these urban areas grew in an unplanned manner, they spilled over into the floodplain. So floodplains are logically areas which flood, because when too much water happens, the water floods. Now you're not supposed to, put your houses in floodplains. So that's what happened in Kerala, for example. Most of the houses were in floodplains, which are not supposed to be areas for making homes. So that's one problem that is created. Second is we concretize. Everything is covered with the road, with the pavement, our houses, everything. So there's no space for water to seep in into the groundwater. Yeah. So what happens is it all now we know from nature, and if you see some of these interesting documentaries of how water, a good soil actually can absorb tons and tons of water, but we've actually killed that soil, we've closed it off, put a coffin lid on it, right? So then what happens is the water collects, it does not absorb, it all immediately comes together, rushes in, and it creates these floods. Now, because our drainage systems are not very well separated from the stormwater systems in many cities, and then and they're not properly channeled. So you'll see in Bombay there are low drainage points where we still make homes and we haven't solved those. So it's actually an urban planning problem. And like I said, it's not that these are not known. I mean, if you look at Mohenjo-daro and Harappa or other civilizations across the world, even they knew how to manage all this. So it's not a technology issue. It's actually an application issue. It's an issue of mindless, unplanned development. Yeah. But therefore, the solution as to what you're talking about is, of course, in principle, it's all there. There are rules that actually in urban areas require all of us to have rainwater harvesting. So every house in Delhi, Bombay, by law, I think Chennai as well, and maybe even many towns, has to have enough roof water harvesting created in the basement for from its the rooftops to be able to use water, especially for gardens and all that. Everybody just puts it notionally, and nobody even ever draws water, or nobody even ever puts water back into it. So I think technologies are known, problems are known, understood. I think the challenge is how do you get people to implement it.
We have a lot of questions, Rajeev ji. So we have Badal here, and then
Yeah,
we'll
please.
go to Manika then. Yeah, Badal.
Yeah. Yeah. Hi. Good afternoon, sir.
Hi.
Sir, your organization has selected 2 districts from 5 states of India, like Bareilly and Barabanki and Mathura in UP. So, sir, what is the criteria for selection of these districts? Like why
Yeah.
Mathura and Barabanki?
So actually, we have selected 2 districts in each of the states. So there are 10 districts. Huh. And in each state, what we did is we did a scoping study to identify typologies. So what are the agroclimatic zone? What type of water problems? So for example, if I share with you Barabanki and Mathura, because you raised those two, you'll find it's interesting. So Mathura is in the Ganga basin. Water table is not too low down. Within meter and a half, you find the water table easily. Highly urbanized, a lot of tourists coming in, and most of the water coming into the Mathura district through the canals or being locally badly managed through is ends up with water quality issues. So it's all polluted, smelling. It is leading to salinity in the soil. So even the little farms they have, because of high nitrate and high salt content, and that water being put there and polluted water being put there all the time, the salination is increasing of the land, and the land is becoming difficult to use. So that's a very different problem and a very different solution we are trying to work with. So here what we've done is we used geographical information system, remote sensing, satellite, worked with National Remote Sensing Center, created mechanisms by which panchayats, not people like you and me, panchayat people can look at layers of their land and then are able to identify the water bodies, correlate on the ground, and then improve these water bodies so that the surface water, which is relatively clean, is available. And then you're also increasing the groundwater percolation to make sure that the water gets better and better and sweeter. This will take some years. But of almost 1900 water bodies in Mathura have been revived after the planning happened. Barabanki is another interesting district. It's strangely, when I started working this, it was very amazing for me as well. One district, so you all use perfumes, and you will be surprised to know that almost 60 to 70% of the perfume comes from base fragrance, which is mint. So it's a base fragrance. Then you add others which are more expensive ones. Now, if you look at the global requirement for mint oil, I'm told that almost 30 to 40% of it comes from this one Barabanki district. Almost 70% of India's entire mint oil export happens from one district. So when we started looking at this intensive and agriculture of a monocrop with mint, almost everybody was very dismissive and they said, no, no, it's not very water intensive. But we said, look at the quantity of mint, then multiply that by how many liters of mint, if you to just say 10% of your area, fine. But if 90% of your area is mint, then it's a different problem. So here it's very interesting that we are working not just with the government, but we are working with a huge international company called Simrise and also Mars. So Mars uses mint in its chocolates. We all have eaten Mars chocolate, some of us, and also Simrise uses it for perfumes. So we actually got involved with the private sector and we said, guys, you have to be sustainable. You have to start looking at how you are causing the water to be used. And they were very, very interested in it. And we're doing this work together. So almost every district, Badal, that you'll find has a different problem statement. So Udaipur has a different problem statement. It's totally desert, huge problems. Yeah. So if you go down to Tamil Nadu, you'll have a Shimoga district, which is on the Western Ghats, high rainfall, but yet no drinking water in summers, right? So very different problem statements, and we're trying to find solutions for each as evidence and models. Then that can. So idea is, if Shimoga, we can find a way what needs to be done. Then the Western Ghats are running almost like 700 kilometers, right? And on this side of Western Ghats, probably many of the typologies or districts along it would have similar problems. So then it could be replicable and scalable. So that's the concept why we pick these up. Pick up one, try to find a solution, offer it back to government and people. Guys, this is one way it works. You want to take this up and take it somewhere else, please do it. And we help build up the capacity to do it. Yeah, Badal?
Okay, sir, got it. Sir, I have one small question. Sir,
Sure.
previously you have talked about the umbrella plans for the farmers. Is there any plan for farming umbrella plan that is available on your website or somewhere else or any other source that a farmer can access to that plan and imply it in his own field?
Did you mean a plan or a plant? I couldn't hear.
It's a plan, umbrella plan.
Okay.
For
Yeah,
farming.
yeah. So these business plans that are so much. So,
Yeah.
this work we did with NABARD. So I'm sure all of you are aware NABARD is the central bank in India, whose mandate it is to push agriculture and rural development into India. So we did a 800 crores worth of project with NABARD, where we got NABARD to give loans to poorest of the poor areas, to groups of farmers to totally do agriculture in a different way. So we said too much subsidy. When you give just a subsidy, it takes a different direction. And then you have 100% loan on private sector lending, which is no farmer can use because it's not possible. It's not a factory that you just set it up and tomorrow profits will happen. It takes 4-5 years to start doing something where profits are coming back. So we did a mix of loan and grants. So we did about 350 projects which are in some of the most vulnerable pockets of India. You can find all that information on, if you want, I can send you as well later. It's on the NABARD website, but especially these 23 business models which are bankable in the sense we did it, created the evidence, did an economic, ecological and social analysis of it, put it all as a cost entity which banks could then finance. And these are available on what is called Bankers Institute of Rural Development. Its short name is BIRD, that is easy to remember. So Bankers Institute is set up to train bankers on how to finance rural development, right? And therefore, if you go on their website, you'll find all these business models already put there and free to use for anybody. If you have any trouble, reach out to me. And I have a colleague here hiding somewhere quietly called Mika Hannah Paul. Mika, just say hi to everybody if you're there.
Yes, very much.
She'd asked me not to introduce her, but I'm going to make the cardinal sin. Yeah, so Mika is there. So Mika, yeah, so you can reach out to us anytime and we can share more information. Back to you, Alkaji.
Thank you so much, sir.
I think, Monica, if you can ask question, and there's a,
hello, sir. So my question is on the lines of climate resilience. So like we talked about how agriculture can be made more resilient to climate change. So I wanted to know how is GIZ handling the resilience of water resources, more riparian resources than the river. For example, there are wetlands. Like there is Sambar Lake, that is a Ramsar recognized wetland in India. And if you had seen the some articles and news lately over the last 2-3 years, the population of migratory birds, the flamingos that were coming to the wetland, are decreasing like tremendously. So that is a part of it is climate it should come. It's a change that is coming due to climate problems. So how is GIZ looking at resources which are in the riparian ecology? How is it handling that?
No, that's a very good question. And so, we have another team with us led by another colleague of mine called Mr. Ravindra Singh. They are focusing totally on this. In fact, they're working very closely with UP government in identifying Ramsar sites and getting these sites, fully registered and compliant to international requirements, so that these sites, and apparently UP government, many other governments also becoming serious about it. Now, the riparian issues, I would say, are at 2-3 levels. One is at the level, at an ecosystem level, like you mentioned, where we are looking at multiple uses and competing uses of water. So like I talked about e-flows, and therefore what you're talking about is, are we just covering up all the water bodies for making homes? Are we converting them into open septic tanks where all the garbage and our drains empty into? So that sort of work is beginning to happen. You've heard about Clean Ganga campaign. You've also seen that many states and are trying to look at how conserving these resources, these bodies, and not letting them be overrun, but also making sure no pollution comes into it. I think it's not easy. There are powerful lobbies that work to take over such things, right? Industrial business, I mean, in terms of, say, builders lobbies or just apathy of people. I've seen even in smaller towns, people converting their nearby open areas into open septic tanks, and they're living right next to it. The pond has become like that, and they're least worried. So I think this is a work to be done also around schools. I think this is a lot about working on the consciousness around conservation, bird watching, getting people to become more aware about what they think they already know, putting pressures, subtle social pressures, getting to work with panchayats. Because like again, now the laws are there, now the resources are also there. Then why is it not happening? So I think it's a lot about helping make these changes happen. But the other element of riparian water system is also the water user associations that are created around various new water structures created. So for example, if a small dam is made, a check dam is made, how will that water be equally used between the people who are close to it? The question is, only the people who are farmers, do they have a water right? Or does everybody living in that village who doesn't even have a farm have a water right and can sell it? So there was some very interesting work done in 80s and 90s. You'll find it very, if you go back in records, the work done on Pani Panchayats in Maharashtra, where they actually created riparian bodies around water structures and gave water, like water shares to everybody, every household in that area. And then they could sell it to each other. And therefore, even people who did not have a direct use of water, say a water body, because I was an agricultural laborer and I didn't own my own land, at least I got some money out of it. But more now I was interested that water body should continue to survive, because my survival is also dependent on it. So you can look, and then of course there's a whole riparian issue of states fighting over each other water now, Krishna, Kaveri, and all. So you can look at it at different levels. Yeah.
We go to Dipesh. He posted in chat one question, but I want him to ask that. Dipesh, then we'll come to Urja, then Ankit, and then Nivya. Yeah. Dipesh?
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, sir. Sir, I have a question. What do you think about water poverty or water security, which is applicable in rural India?
So I think the absence of water security would be the water poverty, isn't it? Right? In my understanding. But I'm being open to also hear from you, your perspective on this. But also this whole water security can be defined in many ways. Whose water? Whose security?
Yeah.
Right? Are we just securing it for the vocal people? Are we securing it for everybody? Is there an equity involved here?
Equity.
Are we looking at future requirements of the unborn generation? So, at what level are we? So we tried to look at it from a water security perspective, which of course is not perfect because we're still trying to look at and grapple at it in different situations. But yeah, so I think the question is, if you have a better understanding of how much water is judiciously available in a unlimited manner, we can suck out all the water from this earth, right? Which is what we seem to do. But judiciously, how much it should be the withdrawal capacity. But then also what Gandhiji said, now how do we differentiate between the need and the greed? So where do we stop? I'll just share a very interesting example from one of the most driest districts of India called Anantapuramulu in Andhra Pradesh. Anantapur is also called, is one of the six of the most backward districts even today, one of the largest districts. Rainfall never varying between 250 to 350 mm in a year. And main response of people is huge migration in non-monsoon seasons to work as cheap labor. Endemic. I mean, I started working in 80s, and this was still like Palamu, Ramanathapuram, and Anantapur. These were still back of beyond districts then, and they still remain till today. Very interestingly, there was a work project done by FAO with some local NGOs there. What they did is they looked up at a panchayat, which was also a sub watershed, and did a water budget analysis. And they looked at how much water was being consumed for different purposes. So drinking water, how much was needed. They were getting, there was some problem in getting it throughout the year, so they tried to solve that. But it was interesting to find that almost 70% of the water use of this very scarce water in this driest of the district was in agriculture, right, for irrigation through ponds and through private wells. So whoever had money dug a well, became a private resource, and they took out as much water as they wanted and started using it. When they started looking at what crops were grown with that and who was growing that crop, they found out of a whole village of more than 400 people, 5 farmers were using 70% of the water for a very water intensive crop of paddy. Now, can you imagine paddy in the middle of a dry area? But that's what we've been doing. We're growing sugarcane in dry areas, right? There's no business growing sugarcane in Maharashtra. Sugarcane can be best grown on the Indo-Gangetic plain where the water table is not so deep. But look at how we do it. Now, the market drives us differently. Policies drive us differently. So then they talk to they without naming and shaming, they took this data back into the panchayat and had a meeting that, your water scarcity is coming from the fact that you're just using most of your water for just these 4 crops. But instead of just blaming a problem, they also went with a solution. They said, we can show you how to do papaya cultivation, which is longer term. It is not as climate sensitive as paddy. It's not so water intensive as paddy. And the amount of money you can get in the market is far higher because everybody is going paddy, but very few people are going papaya. And can you believe it? I went there, I saw it. It was amazing to see that those 4 farmers actually shifted from paddy to papaya. So you could create a water security from a water poverty, right? So I think for me, and I was telling Alka ji, that I see each one of you not just as people professionally, job seekers, CV. Can we be champions of change? Can you pick up one? It's too big a problem. We can't solve them all, right? But can you pick up one and solve it in next few years? Show how it can be done. That'll be worth doing.
Can we have Pooja now? Pooja?
Yes, so first of all, thank you for enlightening us. And my question is, so what is the major challenge or difference that you feel in the rural and urban area when you implement any plan or project?
So we don't have that much experience of the urban areas. Ours is mostly a rural project. But of course, we have peri-urban towns in the districts where we are looking at the entire water security issue. I think some things are different and some things are the same. I think this apathy towards water seems to be common everywhere. The only thing is that in rural areas, because most of the water sources are there, no? So if you're in Bombay, you know that which dams within 80 to 100 kilometers of Bombay supply you all the water. Same for Delhi, right? It comes all the way from Uttarakhand, Himachal, piped. So for Delhi people, they can judiciously or can be caused to make a more judicious use of the water that is already coming. But if they have to do anything on the conservation side, which is too far away from them, they're not linked to it, they're not related to it. But if you're in a rural areas, chances are that you can actually do much more about water conservation, water development, while also conserving your water. So there's a higher likelihood of making an impact. There's also a very interesting concept which is happening in Bhopal, Indore, and some of the cities where they're calling it water are rivers for water or something. So the idea is that each town or city identifies the main catchment from where the water is coming, and then that city municipality takes a responsibility to develop that catchment. So it's just not a water user and it says we'll pay either a small amount of money, and cities can afford to pay money, right? So this is actually about saying no, we'll invest in the conservation of water in that water catchment. So actually urban pockets, water users, can we look at the footprints from where the water is coming, identify those catchments and work with them? Yeah.
I think it's becoming interesting, more and more interesting, in fact. Okay, Ankit, please go ahead.
Good afternoon, sir. My question is about quality of food. As we know, we have a large population to feed, and if we are switching to organic farming or conventional farming or natural farming, which is eco-friendly and sustainable for better quality food, because they are free from chemicals, pesticides. Sir, will it be possible to feed this huge population with this organic farming or traditional or natural farming? Because sir, pests and diseases have more resistance now, and the our soil also has been exhausted. So, sir, how will it be possible? That's the question.
No, that's a very good question. And I think this is a major challenge everybody is talking about and facing. But if you start looking at evidence on the ground, Ankit, it's very interesting. I would really, I'll try to see if I can get some of this information on the work on natural farming at scale. These 200,000 farmers, almost 10% of agricultural land in Andhra is already under natural farming. If you look at Sikkim, though it's a very different context, they have turned organic. So natural, organic is another level. So Sikkim even went organic. So what one is finding is that nature has a way of reclaiming itself, regenerating itself, if allowed to, far faster than we anticipate. So when we started our initial works around natural farming, it was called the natural farming penalty. That the estimation was that because you stop putting high amounts of nitrogen and fertilizers and high amount of water from outside, the land will need 3-4 years to regenerate, and therefore the production and productivity will fall over some time, and then it will increase. And because there's a fall, the poor farmers will not be able to tolerate this. They'll be hit, and therefore there's no interest for them. Two, three things are happening. One is that if actually it's not about stopping these inputs, it's about replacing these inputs, right? So if you're replacing these inputs with Bijamruta and other sorts of formations of fertilizers that are created in a very scientific manner, using local materials, so local leaves that have, biomass, putting some gomutra, putting some, and these are, mind you, not just, so I'm not a revivalist, I'm talking from a scientific perspective. These are inoculants, these are bacteria injections to start the bacterial growth in the soil happening, right? These are very scientific. So once you start doing that, and also if you start doing what they've done is a pre-monsoon sowing for example, paddy. So they're finding, so I looked at the evidence of the 9 major crops grown in that part of Andhra. which is more the Guntur and this very highly industrial agriculture chili pocket. Out of the 9 crops, most of the farmers who I talked to or met, maybe there are other versions as well, but the ones I met clearly said that they did not really, they had more or less the same level of production as they would have done with the chemical and inorganic inputs in year 1. By year 2, their production was a little better. And by year 3, I found farmers who were getting higher production per acre than even the ones who were using chemical and other inputs. So apart from one crop, for 8 crops, this penalty seemed no longer to be valid because of the technical solutions given in terms of package of practices or new things put in terms of in replacing the external inputs. I think there's a lot of evidence to show that this can be done. Actually, this can be done. Yeah. And the most important thing is, see, for a farmer, if you and I are a farmer, we are in the riskiest business. We spend money from our pocket, we put it into the land, very often borrowing it and put it into the land. Then we wait for rains to happen. If they don't happen, then, or if they happen properly, then we end up with something. If the pests don't come, then we end up with something. Then after all the production is done, we still have to go to a market. You may have had bumper produce, good quality food, but nobody is willing to buy it at the right price. So again, you are hit badly. So it's the riskiest business possible if you call it a business. I know why a farmer would even do it. And very often there are theories that they have no other option, but actually for many, farming is a way of life. So they do it. Now, I think for many of such farmers, such solutions are working. And the biggest, most important thing for them is when you start doing natural farming and organic farming, your input cash cost goes down. Now, this would have been a money you would have had to borrow, right? To buy fertilizer, to buy high yielding variety seeds. But if these seeds are your own, if you're putting in 80% of things that are also already biomass surpluses from your own field, then you don't need money for it. Therefore, your investment, therefore your need for a return. So the living incomes increase. You know, this whole concept of living income, the amount of money you need to stay alive, not just income. So I think a living income concept works very well for natural farming. Yeah. But it has to be tried, it has to be shown, and farmers can only convince each other. You and I, who don't do agriculture, can only yap, right?
We'll just take last 2 questions because now I'm in their lunchtime also.
Yes.
So, Nivya, and then Sandeep, and then we will kind of start concluding.
Hello, sir. So actually, I think my question is not really related to agriculture, but I'd still like you to answer it. So basically, you know, there are a lot of industries that are actually situated in the rural areas of India, all right? And they're basically factories which, you know, let out a lot of pollutants and which ultimately pollute rivers. So, and a lot of these factories don't really have the infrastructure of, you know, a treatment plant, because that is the reason why it's all let out in the open. While I do realize that one of the reasons could be, you know, the expense factor, what do you think are the other reasons for those factories to not really, like, you know, acquire those, you know, acquire that infrastructure? And, you know, I'd like to add a second question, though this is something related to policy. But don't you think that the polluter pays principle is something very unfair to, like, you know, a certain section of the society while it benefits the richer class?
Okay, we'll pick up the second one second, but first one first. So I'll spin this question around a bit. So I'll say, okay, what can we do to make it attractive for industries to actually build these assets? And there are some very interesting examples. So I think one of the most polluting and most foul smelling emanates come from dyeing and tanning, right? And these are usually very small MSMEs who are really running below the radar. They don't have the money to really put in expensive waste treatment plants. It's not possible for them. So if you look at, and I'll try to remember the names, there have been examples where clusters have been created, where all tanneries were, instead of being forced to be looked at as criminals and having to hide, were invited to come together into an ecosystem in a certain area, where then not just, so this whole idea of industrial cluster, but done in a different way, that then the waste disposal, waste management facilities are common. So then when you make it at a certainly large scale, it becomes also feasible per unit of water. So then the cost to the industry also comes down, or you can even subsidize it for the time being, right? But because it's in a manageable space, you can deal with it. So this is Tirupur, I remember now. So Tirupur, even 10 years back did this. So they invited a lot of the, I think it was in this case, the textile dyeing small units, and it worked very well. So I think that is the one way to really get industrial parks and these units to really work well together. Yeah. Now over to your other question about polluter pay. So tell me more. What do you see wrong?
So I'll give you an example. This is with respect to what happened in Bichri. So I think there it was very unfair because the person who owned the industry, I mean, he was like, he managed to pay the sum of money that was 50 crore rupees, and he eventually got he got done with it, and then he started his business somewhere else. So, while the polluter was penalized, I mean, this didn't stop him from actually polluting the environment. He continues to do it. So what is the purpose of a disciplinary action when it's not really serving the purpose? So that's why I just find it very unfair.
No, I think, whether it's about society or bringing up your children, if you had to resort to discipline, then you've already lost the battle. So I think coercion is not going to work. I think it's very important that first you find ways by which it becomes a win-win for both. And I totally agree with you. Now, if you really look at this whole extended responsibility concept, where there's a talk where, for example, Tetra Pak said that, okay, our 9 lead plastic is really very difficult to degrade in the environment. So while we'll try to improve the technology, seemingly they've done it. They've got a degradable version now. But they said, okay, we will take back, or we'll pay, or we will set up a network to get some of our polluted material back. So there are different ways to find positive ways to do it. There's a very interesting work being done by one of our teams called Alag Karo, the climate team. Very interesting work on how household segregation and then converting that using the informal waste disposal system to make more money and actually manage it better. So the Indian stories, I think there's much that can be done. Polluter pay principle should then also apply to each one of us who throws away a toffee wrapper, isn't it? But we get away with it. So ultimately, I think it's all about social norms. So why is it that when people get into a DTC bus in Delhi, they can put pan and they can spit every corner? But why is it when they get into a metro, they don't do it? So what is the behavior change of the same people? Why does it happen? So I think understanding why people do what they do is very important before we even try to blame people or blame systems. I think the fact that we're not understanding the problems deep enough before trying to solve them means we'll do more of the same and we will not have real solutions. So I think that's an interesting area to work on. It'll be interesting to see what new formats can come out. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, I think this is one Tetra Pak example is very good example that way. Okay, so Sandeep, last question that you're going to ask.
Hello, sir. So, am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. So my question is regarding the rising water markets, how it is impacting the depletion of water in aquifer, like how rising water markets has impacting the depletion in aquifers, and also the cropping patterns and the shift from farming to selling water into the market, if you talk about the rural India.
So can you give me an example of where you're talking about?
So like in Gujarat, the farmers used to sell water in off seasons, and if they are generating more benefit out of selling the water, then they are just shifting from farming to selling the water. So is it impacting the farming, or how much it is impacting the groundwater?
So then ideally we have to go back to this whole format that we were discussing of doing actually a water budget analysis, right? So the question is that, see, this is, if you look at Punjab and UP, Western UP, when labor became a problem, many of the farmers could no longer afford labor and intensive operations of agriculture. So then the industry came and gave them a solution that you grow poplar for paper. You just plant it, it's not foraged. You just fence it. After 5 years, the company will come and cut it and give you the money. So as soon as we get in economic in orientation about our resources, this is what starts happening. And I think the problem with our current morality is that we only give an economic value to all our resources. And if we are only looking at water as an economic value, and not its larger ecological value and its social value, its cultural value. I mean, in India we have, and in the West also, there's this fashion of calling rivers as mothers and doing a MOU with the river. Now, I mean, on the spirit side, it's fine. But I think the fact is that if you start only looking at natural resources and economic value, this is what will happen. So I think the question there would be, for you and me, people like us would be, can we go and see that if this farmer was caused to stop doing agriculture and actually sell the water, then how much money is he or she making out of water, right? Can we offer an equivalent use of water, which or which even leads to less use and the same amount of money? Because in the end, the problem for everybody is the income, right? So if we solve the income problem, we'll solve the water problem, right? Isn't it? Why am I trying to sell my kidney, na? Because I probably want to save my house, right? So if you can stop me from selling my kidney, then I will save my house, definitely. Yeah. No, it's a good one, and I think it'll be interesting to do this research, Sandeep.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I think this is very very interesting, interactive, and participatory. I think when they approached you, we had this discussion how to make it participatory. And thank you very much. Though it is like almost 2:45, they have been sitting from 10 without any 5 minutes. But I think the kind of questions came, I think we need to also appreciate the kind of diversity of question and experience that they had and they were asking you. And definitely the way you had responded based on immense experience you have, and you worked in diverse areas and as well as on diverse in different geographies. So that really helped. And I'm sure all of you have really enjoyed it, not from the perspective that it was very interactive, but from the point that we really touched upon very important issues here and the range of it. So that's very much. And some of the material that you said, films and any material add on, if you can share the links also, will be very wonderful. I'll pass it on to them in their WhatsApp group. And any point of time, any further connect you feel that these young fellows can benefit out of it from any of your experience and projects. Fellowship is still, as I told you, 6 months till December. In between, we have a lot of water smart solution boot camps also happening. So we will be happy to have some more experiences from your side, GIZ. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Alkaji. Thank you for having me. It was also thought-provoking for me, many of the questions, and made me rethink about why we do what we do and how we can do it better. And it's a community of practice, it's a community of learning, and I've enjoyed being part of it. And we are available even in the future. If any of you have any questions, you can reach out to us through Alkaji, and we'll try to connect you to people who know more than us or know what you want to know, right? Okay, I wish you the best and really looking forward to some star-blazing work from these fellows. Alkaji, right?
We also look forward to that. Thank you. Okay, thank you so much. Fellows, you stay for 2 minutes and then we'll take a go to the break. Thank you, sir. Thank you.